right. All right, can everybody hear me online? I'm going to assume so. All right.
Yes.
I don't know where to look. There's so many cameras and places to see you all. You're on several walls here. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Catherine Rafelson. I'm the president of SID-US and delighted to welcome you all here to our Food Security and Agriculture Workgroup event on how are agriculture development organizations pivoting post-USAID. We have quite a few people here in person. Feel free to sit around the table. There's lots of places. We have a great crowd here today, despite crazy weather after, what was it, 80 degrees here yesterday? We had windy, snowy craziness. For those of you who are not privileged enough to be in this insane part of the world, that actually even prevented one of our speakers from being able to come in today. But luckily, thank goodness for technology, we can all slow down. But thank you to all those who braved the forces of nature out there. Before we start, I just wanted to, can you go to the next slide? Because I can't remember what happens next. Do I talk about SID or do I talk about rules? Okay, we just always like to make sure everybody knows that anything you hear today, opinions, et cetera, are those of our speakers and not necessarily of SID's. And then just a little bit about SID, because not all of you are necessarily SID-US members. Hopefully, you know, we are the largest and most active chapter of the Society for International Development, which was founded in 1957. So we're coming up on 70 years, I think, to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We primarily hold events for the purpose of information sharing and networking. We're not an advocacy group. We're here to connect you and to bring you information. We have individual and institutional members, and you can find out a lot more on our website if you don't already know it. We have some really important events coming up soon. I think a number of you were probably at our annual membership meeting last week. We talked a little bit about some of this. For our institutional members, we're holding a salon series on a number of different topics. These are very, very small, off-the-record, in-person conversations. We had one on mergers and acquisitions. We have one next week on new financing models and partnership models. And then we have one on critical minerals coming up next month. We are also planning an unconference, which I don't know if any of you has been to one before, but the idea is that instead of sitting and listening to a pre-planned agenda with speakers talking to you, participants create the agenda on the spot. So participants will come, we'll vote on the topics to be discussed, and we'll go off to breakout sessions with facilitators to talk about those topics. It's all around the future of international development. And the idea is to have everybody really having a voice in what needs to happen and what should happen. And hopefully that will then feed into our actual conference, which will be a traditional conference held in June. Everybody's welcome to attend those two events. There's more information on our site. The unconference is actually happening 2 weeks from today. Is that right? Yes, 2 weeks from today. So if you're interested, I suggest you sign up or learn more quickly or talk to us after this event today. We have a lot of other things going on, but I know we want to get to this event. So if you can go to the next slide, I just want to mention that this is being recorded today. And we'll share the recording afterwards. For those of you online, if you need closed captioning, you can access that through your individual Zoom settings. Also,
She's
for those
where?
Hello?
Oh,
Can you,
okay.
can you mute? Great, thanks. Those of you online, if you have questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. If you're in person, we'll have a Q&A piece after the event. So before we get going with our speakers and our moderator, I want to introduce, we actually have a couple of board members with us today. We have Sylvia McGray here from our board in person. Sylvia's on our executive committee and has been a board member for a long time. And then we also have online Jeff Halvorson, who is the Director of Sustainability at Pepsi-Co. And he's going to say a few words to just sort of set the stage. Jeff is with Pepsi's, has been with Pepsi's Global Sustainability Ag team. He's with the real estate team now. And before that was with Resonance, working with USAID and DFAT on private sector strategies, has broad international development experience and a lot to say. And so with that, I'm going to hand it to Jeff to just set the stage for today's event.
Cool. Thanks, Catherine. Nice to see everybody on virtually, and good to see that there are so many people in person. So just wanted to thank the committee led by Matt for putting this on and acknowledging, I just want to acknowledge like the quality of the panel that we have lined up. We're really excited about that. I was brought in to say a couple things just in terms of we're at a real kind of pivot moment when it comes to international development, particularly around agriculture. And then these shifts that we're all seeing when it comes to operating models, USAID funding, priorities, whatnot. And so we wanted to bring in some people that could talk about practical adaptation. And so how these organizations are responding in practice to some of these changes. As Catherine mentioned, I'm still with PepsiCo, but I was doing a lot of work when it comes to public-private partnership creation in the agricultural space. Before that, I counseled a lot of USAID missions on doing their private sector engagement strategies with companies like companies like PepsiCo. I just lost my train of thought because I think that's Jim Thompson online, and he's like one of my mentors and like one of the OGs of this space. So huge shout out to Jim if I got that correct. And if you're a different Jim Thompson, shout out to you for having a really good meeting. So, um, the so anyway, totally lost my train of thought. That was awesome. So key insights that we wanted to pull away from like this transition that everybody's going through is we're moving from how do we comply with donor requirements, how do we meet their needs, to how do we design different business models, different partnerships that are moving beyond these traditional funding cycles, these political shifts, these new market realities, and just reflecting how some of these organizations have evolved and thinking about this for the rest of the membership at SID. Um, And so I think what I've heard many times from everybody across the SID world is like post USAID does not necessarily mean it's with a world without USAID. It just means that we have to think about diversified funding models, more engagement models to work with different types of clients, and then different types of ways to think about accountability, resilience, and then the outcomes that those clients and those partners want. And then so from a corporate perspective, I know that we're really interested in what these traditional implementers are bringing to the table when they can talk about farmer engagement strategies that help our supply chain resilience, our supply chain kind of like productivity and cost control, anything that we can use to manage risk and complexity and just enhance kind of the overall stability of our supply chains as so many things are happening, and then bringing like speed, speed to market, looking at different kind of innovations that could be brought to the table. And then, certainly the work that we did when I was on the ag team, mixing what the development professionals, the development community brings to the corporate community. And it's super valuable, which is why we did a lot of partnerships with organizations like USAID. And so we see agriculture, certainly for PepsiCo is sitting at kind of like the heart of our company. So without good potatoes, you can't have Lay's, basically, which then ties into we need strong, healthy soil. We need strong, healthy, financially sustainable farmers in order to make that happen. And so we see the clear connection between what the development community brings to the table and then making sure that that meets our needs as a company. Um, And so I just wanted to pass this off soon to Matt, who has a lot more experience in this space than I do, is a far more eloquent speaker than I am. And so I just wanted to pass it over to him so that he can introduce our panelists who are coming from Indigo Ag, ACDI VOCA, and DT Global. And I just hope that everybody gets a lot out of this sessions in terms of practical, what's working, what's not working, what are some trade-offs, certain success stories, things that you can take back to your own organizations. So thank you very much. And Matt, it's the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Jeff. All right, hi everybody, welcome. My name again is Matt Baer. I am the co-chair of the Food and Agriculture Working Group at SID, and here to welcome you to this event today. So we have three great speakers. They're each going to speak for about 10 minutes about their work and how their organization is pivoting post-USAID and finding new things to do, new strategies, new geographies, and new problems to solve. After that, we'll open it up to questions from the audience, both online and here in person. So to start with, Joan Abbott is the Associate Manager of Sustainability Solutions at Indigo Ag, which is a really cool organization that's relatively new, but doing really exciting things in the world of agriculture. And so I really wanted to bring somebody like them into this space. And what better person than Joan here? So Joan has been with the organization for a short time, but she helps with Indigo Ag, she helps the climate committed companies to leverage Indigo's programs to meet corporate ESG goals, reduce scope 3 emissions, and make product claims. Her work builds on her career at the intersection of business and agriculture, previously working on projects in the space of smallholder agriculture with TechnoServe, and she also supported operational policy at IFEX. And she began her career in management consulting at PwC and has degrees from Georgetown and Hopkins Sykes. Cristobal Aguilar is the managing director of agriculture and community development at ACDI VOCA, which I'm not going to spell out everything what it stands for. Maybe Cristobal can do that for us. But he has worked for more than 20 years in international agriculture development. He leads program strategy and new business development at ACDI VOCA, including the project Pro Occidente, which is an agriculture and economic development project in Honduras with the Inter-American Development Bank and the government of Honduras. Originally from Bolivia, Cristobal is an agronomist and was the chief of party on USAID projects in Bolivia and Mozambique, just two countries right next door to each other. Right? Finally, online, we have Sloan Mann, who's the president of the US president of DT Global. As president, Sloan oversees DT Global's corporate strategy and operations at the US Home Office in DC and field offices abroad. As Sloan is a West Point graduate where he, after that, served 5 years in the Army, during which he conducted peacekeeping missions in Bosnia and Kosovo. Over the span of his career, Sloan has held several prominent roles within USAID in Sudan, Iraq, and Afghanistan, where he was a development advisor to the special forces. So without any further words, let me turn it over to the speakers. Joan.
Hi, everyone. As Matt kindly said, I work for Indigo Ag. It's a Boston-based company, but I'm here based in DC. And the objective of the company is to scale regenerative agricultural practices across this country and across the world. So there's two main frameworks that we use, or types of programs. One is generally the sort of scope 3 program model, where we are talking to a company, perhaps Pepsi-Co, and they say, we really want to understand the emissions factors in our potatoes that we source from a number of states in the High Plains. Can you take a look at what's going on in our supply shed? And we have a number of scientists and tech people who have created, who have calibrated and validated a biogeochemical model to take a look at those emissions factors. And we have a wonderful technology platform where those farmers kind of input what's going on in their fields, and then a company can make claims or can report against their scope 3 emissions, what's going on in their ag supply chains. The second program type that we have is carbon credits. So we work with farmers to change their practices to practices that help sequester carbon in the soil. These are soil carbon credits. There's a lot of different kinds of carbon credits, but that's sort of the swim lane that we exist in. And we operate in a number of countries. So with regard to the carbon credits, we are mostly in the United States. We also have a joint venture in India. And then on the scope 3 side, we are in Canada, US, Brazil, Argentina, and a couple of European countries as well. Overall, I mentioned we have this process-based model when we're looking at what's happening to sequester carbon. And I mentioned that because with soil carbon, we have to do a lot of work to kind of educate what's happening, how that carbon is being sequestered, to convince companies that, you know, this is a legit way to sequester carbon. This is a way to diversify your kind of portfolio of offsets. And we had this amazing deal earlier this year where Microsoft has agreed to buy 2.85 million credits over the course of the next 12 years. So they are really pioneering in this space and kind of setting an example. And right now we're about 3% of their carbon credit portfolio, which is, and you know, may seem small, but it's a really big deal for us. And I think around 5% is soil carbon credits overall. So that just kind of gives you an idea of like types of buyers that are buying soil carbon credits. It's people who have nothing to do with agriculture. And ultimately what's happening is, you know, money from big tech is like falling into the hands of American farmers. I can't speak on behalf of the joint venture and who's buying the Indian credits because I'm not working on that side of the house, but they also have over 1 million carbon credits. From there, I'll just say where I sit at Indigo is on the buyer side. So I'm talking to people at food and ag companies, people at tech companies about, you know, what are their, you know, plans for sustainability and how can Indigo be involved in that. In terms of pivoting, so I've made a personal pivot. I was previously at TechnoServe, great organization. I don't know if anyone is here from TechnoServe today, but from the perspective of Indigo has had to deal with as many other organizations have had to deal with these international projects and domestic projects being canceled. Luckily, Indigo was fairly insulated from that because we were not as involved in government-funded projects, but we have had to make a really strong business case for regenerative ag in this current political climate, which should be a surprise to no one. And I'm sure you'll maybe talk along the same lines that the business case is super important. And it has always been important. At my previous employer, TechnoServe, the tagline is literally business solutions to poverty. So that being said, I think when push comes to shove here, 2026, we've had to think a little bit differently. And one of the themes that I've seen come up, not only at Indigo, but at some of our customers and also in the NGO space, is collective action. So we've already mentioned public-private partnerships, but I'm seeing that rhetoric become even more prominent in terms of collective action, not only in the public-private space, but private, NGO and private. And at Indigo, we're really seeing opportunities at the intersection of three things. One is environmental risk. So one area that we've identified an environmental risk is in the high plains of the United States, where the Ogallala Aquifer is. And that runs, I think, from South Dakota all the way to Texas. It's this huge aquifer and it's been depleted. And there were worries from the US government back in the 30s during the Great Depression when a lot of farmers were kind of moving out there and farming a lot of that land for the first time. So this has been an environmental concern for a long time and it still is today. So, and a lot of companies are sourcing agricultural commodities from that region. And then the second, so that's kind of an example that the environmental risk has to be demonstrated and Indigo needs to make the point that this is a risk that needs to be addressed. The second one is willing communities. We need to be working with farmers that are excited to engage with us and enroll in our programs. And I think in a room full of people who worked in international development, we all know like kind of farmer consent and like helping them be excited about joining your program is absolutely essential to the success of that program. And then the third thing is natural opportunities that kind of exist in Indigo's portfolio. So if a company comes to us and says, we're sourcing rice from the United States and Brazil, and how can we invest? We can say, oh yeah, we do a lot of stuff in rice. We have scientists that are rice experts. And so we can talk to you about like a co-investment opportunity. So between environmental risk, willing communities, and natural opportunities for collaboration, we are talking to a lot of companies about priority landscapes where they can get involved. And there's a lot of different ways I see that happening in terms of kind of vertical collaboration in supply chains and horizontal collaborations, and we can get into kind of the different formulations that I've seen. But to wrap up, I think I said initially, like fundamentally, we are not relying on government programs to succeed, government policy even to succeed. It helps when policy aligns with our goals, but we're operating, for example, in the voluntary carbon market, which is, governed by, it's private sector investment is going into it, and like non-governmental organizations are providing kind of the playbook for what the rules are. So it would certainly help if policy supported that, but we're operating outside of the government and like legislation that we're trying to focus on the voluntary aspect and engage with private sector there. And then the last message I want to say is, I think the urgency message is more important than ever, really clarifying why should a private sector partner or an NGO partner or a state government get involved with Indigo. I think we all are very familiar with the urgency messaging in development, but for me, transitioning to this role just in 2025, I was able to get exposure to the American side of things, and there's a lot of urgency messaging here at home. Like the average age of an American farmer is close to 60 years old. A lot of farmland is going to change hands in this country in the next decade, and that'll be super interesting. And I think that there's a different kind of urgency messaging if you're working in a developing country context as well, and that needs to be brought to the forefront. So I'll pause there and pass it over to Cristobal.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much, Joan. Great to hear the story of kind of a personal pivot from a more slightly conventional international development organization like TechnoServe and to the work of an organization like Indigo Ag that is slightly more private sector oriented, using markets like carbon markets and working both in the US and abroad with a lot of the same goals, but perhaps using slightly different means to get to some of those things. All right, turning over to Cristobal.
Thank you very much. Probably you're more familiar with VOCA, but yeah, we are an international NGO based here in Washington, over 60 years of work. We see ourselves as an economic growth organization, certainly focused on agriculture. And from there, we have grown in different areas, starting from access to finance, gender inclusion, working on different areas of working with suppliers, working with private sector engagement. So it has been really, the agriculture has been our core where we have grown to different other areas. And certainly the crisis that had happened with USAID has affected us. Has been really a hard year last year. And our pivot, our diversification strategy has been more based on the institutional diversification. So now we are operating as a group with the other entities that we had created 30 years ago and 10 years ago. One is another NGO that was focused on private funding. And we had also an impact investment facility that is managing some impact funds. So that has been a little bit of our strategy in terms of how we have diversified. Programmatically speaking, we haven't done really a drastic pivot in our approach. And I think that's kind of one of the advantages that we have seen in this new landscape, that basically what we have as a skills, as our assets, as our knowledge and know-how is still useful, it's still needed. It's the demand for everything that we were in terms of development, it's still there, even if not more pronounced. And so there is definitely the need is there. And basically one of the areas that as a ACDI VOCA that we have been probably getting deeper has been working with multilateral organizations. So we have found, we had one project at the time of the crisis with the Inter-American Development Bank in Honduras, the one that Matt mentioned. That was a project funded together with the government, because those are loans that the government takes. And in this case, was the government of Honduras who was taking this loan from the Inter-American Development Bank to create, to basically provide technical assistance and investment on technical and climate smart technologies for over 10,000 farmers in Honduras. So that was one of the programs. And then basically, when the whole crisis hit, we were like in the process of renewing our contract, going through a second phase. So that was basically the decision was, okay, let's learn more about the multilaterals, and definitely it's a different world, it's a different client. And I wanna talk a little bit more about that, give you a little bit more of details of how has been that process of us understanding better this new client that we had at that time. Multilaterals are really an important investment. The amount of money that they have annually, it's more or less in the $150 billion. And out of that, 10% goes toward agriculture. So we're talking about a donor or a set of donors that have basically 3 times the money that USAID used to have per year. And out of that, 10% towards agriculture and economic growth is agriculture specifically, not even economic growth. Agriculture specifically, it's a lot of money that is there. But of course, it's a different methodology in terms of how that money moves from the bank account towards the farmer in the ground, isn't it? So, and there basically, as I said, though most of that money is a loan, are loans that the government takes for doing the implementation. Generally speaking, the government itself implement the project. But in the case of Honduras, we found that the government was willing to basically hire an entity that specializes in development, and that's how we got that contract through a competitive process, and we are implementing that program. There we have learned that definitely we need to pivot also how we do our procurement. One of the first things that we learned is how important it is to have the key personnel and to basically provide the technical expertise that they need in terms of the local expertise that they need for implementing this type of programming. 50% of the in the case of Honduras, and I think it's something that resonates with the rest of the multilateral banks, 50% of the evaluation criteria are the key staff. So one initial advice in all this is if you don't have a strong recruitment team or excellent networks on the country that you want to operate, that you want to bid, to put together those key personnel profiles and recruitment is a major effort. So you need to be aware of that. The other important thing that is more like a mindset that needs to also change, that I won't say that it was not present, but this is different, is the fact that these loans, as I said, are loans that the government is taking. So the responsibility of implementing these projects are higher than when it was a donation it still was taxpayers' money, but it was a different approach. Here is every single Honduran has taken a loan to basically support their own Hondurans peers, isn't it? So our responsibility to provide the results are higher, and we take it that seriously. What else? I think one of the things that we found is that in the case of the government of Honduras, they had different type of projects. One that they were implementing on their own, and one that they were implementing basically purchasing the services. And I think we demonstrated that the way that we were doing, we were able to deliver more efficiently the results that they were looking for. Our contract is by results. So we were giving those results that they needed or that they were looking for better and faster and more efficiently than the products that they were implementing themselves. And now they are moving towards that. Basically, they are doing a lot of purchasing this type of services. So I think that's a key measure that I think there is a business case, again, going back to the business case point, that is important to showcase to the governments that have this type of resources that are basically most of the countries where we operate, that there is a possibility to have what they are looking for, which is basically a project that can serve their political interest. So again, going back to our tools that we had before, we were quite keen in the last years on working politically and thinking politically as we implement our projects. So here is another good example of how to use those tools at the moment of working together and approaching the different multilaterals in the different parts of the world to show them that that they can still have their political interest covered in terms of implementation for the government. When it comes to the results, it's true that they may lose some of their leverage that they have on the different positions that they can offer to their party people. That's true. But I think the gains that they have, it's a trade-off that definitely they are willing to explore. I think we can show them that there is that the advantage that they will have are going to be higher than just the fact of providing some jobs to their constituents or their people from their own part. So in the case of in our case, we were lucky enough to have a strong COP, someone that really understood that political sensitivity, but also the technical part. Because that's the other important thing that I think in this type of programming, our teams need to understand that they are going to be under a lot of political pressure from the government. And our team here in the HQ office needs to also understand that they need to provide that backup and that framework and that shield to our own team so they can operate, do the technical part, the administrative part, and basically alleviating the pressure that they may receive from the government in terms of, you can imagine different requests from the government. So the moment that you can show that you have these systems and that you can show that the leadership has been there at the moment, starting from the signing the contract and then follow up in other meetings, that type of thing shows that that there's an entity behind this project and that we are going to follow the rules that govern the contract that we have, and therefore there is little or no room to any other things to negotiate. So that's another important lesson that we have learned, how important it is to really set the boundaries and work together with the government. I think after we're already working with the government 3 years, we're happy to report that we are really considered as their star project. We are by far the project that is implemented faster and with good results. And something that was very interesting to see is that because one of the key indicators from the banks are how much money you're moving, the negotiations regarding the cash flow was easier than we thought, because there is a strong incentive for them to push more money upfront in initial payments. So that was something interesting to learn, and I think it's important to have in mind, because definitely in these days to have a healthy cash flow is super useful as we know. So I will stop there.
Great, thanks, Cristobal. If I could just recap a little bit, the heart of the matter of the way that the money flows here from the multilateral and gets implemented into a project, I think it's really fascinating, worthwhile to repeat here. So and he estimates that multilaterals have around $150 billion that they're spending or loaning on these types of development projects. About 10% of that goes to agriculture. And a lot of that is a loan to a host country government, who then has to implement an activity and spend money. And they sometimes do it themselves. They often do it themselves. Yes. But they often have trouble doing that because they're not specialized in that subject matter, or they don't have field staff in that particular region. And in this case, ACDI VOCA did. And so they were chosen to implement this project for the government of Honduras. And the government is accountable to itself, right? There's no donation that's happening here. It's work that an implementer is doing for a government that's responsible to itself. Thank you, Cristobal. Okay, Sloan, over to you online.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for the introduction, and thank you, Catherine and Jeff, for putting this panel together and for inviting me, a non-ag expert, but that's okay. I hope I can add some value. So for those of you who don't know DT Global, we work across a number of different technical sectors, including agriculture. And we have a number of different clients and donors. DFAT, just name a few. DFAT is our largest, European Union, FCDO, Germans, and different organizations there. And in the US, though, I run the US operation. 80% of our portfolio was USAID. So you can imagine, know all of you can, that it has been quite a challenge over the last year to pivot and adapt and evolve to this new reality. And in many ways, we're reinventing our business, right? From our processes and procedures to our financial management to our business development to, in some ways, how we think. And I'll try to explain this more with my remarks. But I'll start with our business development, how that's changed. And well, I can tell you we're not waiting around for our fees to drop anymore. We're really trying to match our capabilities in countries with development needs we see on the ground and generating ideas that we think will have an impact. And then we're having to engage a broad range of stakeholders. I mean, Congress, congressional staffers, we'll have to organize events to promote great ideas, think tanks, private companies, embassies in the country, the military, Department of State, and others. I mean, it's challenging because we're not used to having the aperture open this much to have to engage such a broad range of people. But we're finding, given the current environment, we want to help shape foreign assistance priorities. It's really important. We're doing a lot more engagement with bureaus in the Department of State, and it's clear that there's still a lot to be worked out internally there. As you know, the $50 billion foreign assistance package was part of the recent budget that passed. There's a lot of challenges to that. There's still unfilled political appointees, changing priorities, lack of contracting staff and procurement mechanisms. So we are seeing signs of life. I'm sure we all are, especially in the health sector and in the MOUs that are being signed to move money directly to governments. But our assessment is we're likely 6 to 12 months out, if not longer, for robust, before we get to robust procurements coming out of State Department. We've certainly looked at other USG agencies besides state. We've looked at smaller bilateral donors like SDC, the Swiss, and Danita. But we've primarily been investing in and expanding our existing private sector advisory practice. And we work across two main areas: food and fiber, and that's primarily regenerative agriculture and sustainable supply chains. And then on the critical mineral side, we do research on international best practices for extraction, LTO, license to operate, workforce development skills, and a host of other areas with critical minerals. But I'd like to give you one specific example of our work on regenerative agriculture. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dogs barking, but I was meant to come in and then the snow, and I had flashbacks to the 2 weeks of Snowmageddon in January and February. So I decided not to brave the roads. But our advisory team is currently working with a North American spices company. Apparently, we didn't get permission to use their name, so I have to not use their name in this example. But they're having a major effort to shift from basic sustainable sourcing to regenerative agriculture. So the challenge is their supply chain is incredibly diverse, ranging from small scale spice farmers in tropical regions to massive commercial farms in North America. And they need a single flexible strategy that works for all environments. So our approach has been to partner with their sustainable procurement team to define the goal, right? So we've led some technical workshops to help the leadership agree on a clear vision and high level commitment for 2030, and then build a playbook for them. So currently creating a step-by-step guide that defines what qualifies as regenerative agriculture and best practices for running these types of projects. And then, of course, measuring success. So designing a monitoring system to track real world results, ensure that changes actually benefit the environment and the farmers. So we're really excited by this type of work and we're investing in it. And we really want to expand this work, especially in the climate we all find ourselves in. So let me talk about a few other things that are having a real impact on us and how we think. So first off, we're also shifting to a new financial model. I know this isn't a financial topic, but I gotta say it's changed really everything. So we call it our finance transformation. I mean, the days of cost plus contracting we think are gone. So we're moving to a much more commercial model, recognizing revenue differently, changing our financial tracking metrics. We're actually changing our ERP system. We're bringing in more commercially experienced finance staff. We're having to be very flexible on how we price because we have private clients and different donors. And then we're having to do trainings for staff. It's quite a effort to kind of rejigger how we've traditionally done our financial modeling and accounting. And then we're operating differently, obviously, right? So we're no longer organized strictly by technical teams. We're much more sort of program versus non-program teams. As we've downsized, everyone is expected to do multiple roles, wear different hats, and contribute across all areas of the business. I mean, we're all kind of rolling our sleeves up to get whatever is needed to get done, but we are having to go to the market to hire for niche skills we need for short-term work instead of having in-house a deep bench of expertise. Don't have that luxury anymore. As the market continues to change, we're having to operate on much shorter time horizons, having to be very responsive and flexible, and it certainly hasn't been an easy shift. Let me talk about what we're learning, and then I'll close there. So first, as we adopt this new way of working and really thinking, it's much more commercially minded. Behavior change with staff takes time and can be bumpy. We're trying to communicate more. We're trying to clearly articulate the why behind our changes and really be patient. But at the same time, we can't be too patient. We really need to move and adapt and change. So behavior change is always a challenge. Change management is always a challenge. Widening the aperture on who we engage is also hard work. It actually takes intentional planning and mapping of the different groups that influence outcomes. And with fewer staff, there are real trade-offs, right? Balancing external engagement opportunities and getting work done. So we're having to deprioritize some things and make some hard decisions because we really have to be out there engaging with a whole different set of characters. And quite frankly, the skill sets needed to build relationships and engage with all these different actors is different and important. The old ways of business development just don't work anymore. You can't just take your USAID processes and procedures and apply the same approach. We're having to be much more creative and flexible, learning about different donors. The business development for our private sector advisory practice is very different from a traditional donor model. And so actually, Stephen Baker, I think, is in the room. He leads our advisory practice. He can certainly attest to that, trying to get our traditional BD team to move at the pace he needs them to move at. I don't know if you can hold your hand up, Stephen, so people can see you.
Yes.
Good, thanks. I can't see. We have to be more flexible with who we work with. So I mentioned that, but it's also engaging with Gulf Cooperation Council countries. We've multiple engagements with the Department of War because they're in some of these contacts which are in some of these countries. Private companies doing business in these countries can open doors and understand the environment that are really important for us. We've also learned that our efforts with state and the broader U.S. government, we don't necessarily have the contract vehicles or the mechanisms to receive funding on administration priorities. That is a real challenge. On the private sector side, what we're learning is not all of our development technical skills are immediately transferable. Now, Having said that, I think agriculture is the one example where it's much more transferable than other technical sectors, but we can't just reach into our development technical teams overseas and say, hey, we need you for this, private sector assignment. It doesn't, it's not working very well. We're actually having to go to the market to find technical niche skills. The private sector context and goals are different. The ways and timelines to get a funded project are distinct. And the skill sets of building relationships is also different than working with public sector institutions. Finally, I'll say I'm not sure we have the balance right yet of putting a majority of our resources into a smaller set of opportunities or spreading ourselves a bit around and a bit more thin to see what comes about or what hits. We're also continually confronted with the question, short-term focus versus long-term strategic outlook. And that's something that I struggle with on a weekly basis. And getting that balance right is really a challenge. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you and look forward to discussion.
Okay, thank you, Sloan. I really like something that you said at the beginning about how you guys are reinventing and not just waiting for RFPs, but actually going out there and kind of talking to your potential audience and testing ideas. And I mean, this is something that the private sector always does, right? If you own a product, you're not just going to wait for the consumer to always come into your store, but you got to go out and see what the consumer is thinking about and if they're changing their mind about something. And companies are always doing research about preferences and really trying to get ahead of that curve. So interesting to see that you guys doing this too. So great. I think maybe I'll just give one round of questions to the panelists and let you guys ask each other questions if you do, but then I'll open it up to everybody here in the room. And in the meantime, people online, feel free to put in some questions into the chat. So first, I want to come back to you, Sloan. You mentioned about how you got your staff is changing. You need different skill sets and you have behavior change. That's sometimes a challenge, but in particular about the different skill sets, I was wondering if I could ask you about that for a second, because as you can imagine, a big part of the SID community, it's upended the professional careers of many people. And so I think a lot of people are thinking about how they can continue to work in development, but how and what needs to be different about it. So could you share us a few things you're seeing about, like, what are some of the new skill sets that you're seeing in need?
That's a great question. And, we've really had to prioritize a core team that can do a lot of different things. And one of them is relationship building, whether it's going to I'll just use a name, a Bechtel, or going to State Department meeting. I mean, there's different types of skills, but we need people who can really going to be a jack of all trades. We also need people who, yes, are technical and new program management, but also have a really good understanding of numbers and how gross margin works. And, we just can't afford to have, one trick ponies anymore. We've got to have folks who have a lot of different skills in their toolkit, because we need that. I mean, we're having to be much more creative on who we engage and how we think and how we develop concepts and who we work with. And so it really takes someone who's flexible, creative, and it can adapt to a lot of different circumstances and environments.
Great, thanks. How about Cristobal? Can you talk a little bit more of the challenges that you find in working in the multilateral sphere? You mentioned this part of the government, working with the government and with the host country government, and how they might have some entrenched systems of preferences and hiring preferences with their friends. But what more beyond that can you say about what's different about working with the multilateral that is different from how it was with USAID?
I think another difference is that you have basically in some way two clients, because the IDB or the multilateral is still there. You still have the presence is less frequent and less notable, but it's still there. So I think that was another thing, that we have to follow their general compliance regulation, but then your day-to-day client is the copper. when it comes to our previous donor working with USAID, you had basically the same. It was exactly you were talking with the people that were enforcing those compliance. But here you have to navigate the compliance of the money that is coming from, but also your client who may not understand fully all those regulations and compliance from the sources of the money. So that's another tricky part that you have to sometimes work together and so navigate those compliance issues and administrative issues together with your own client, so we are in the same. So you are in the same page with them when it comes to regulations and whatnot. So that's really another kind of novelty in terms of skills that our team needs to develop to work with both at the same time.
Okay, thanks. And Joan, maybe my question for you is: you mentioned the role that collective action can have to help advance some of these strategies that we're talking about, and who do you see as kind of a leading the push to help develop these platforms and collective action? USAID helped organize some of them, I know, but I know there's others. But with a void of USAID, we've seen a lot of these collective action platforms over the year. They're only as good as the members that are in it, and often a lot of people follow, but without a leader, they can flounder. So what do you guys see in terms of collective action programs that are more successful or less successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're hoping that we can be sort of the linchpin to bring people together as Indigo. But I think I find the most interesting and compelling projects to be when you have two private sector entities who, they might be seen at times almost as competitors, but we had this great example this year with the Walmart and Calanova. They both source rice from the Mid-South USA, and they, one sources rice as an input into snacks, and the other one is selling rice, like retail rice that you buy off the shelf. And they're both sourcing rice from the same acres. So they're like, oh, why don't we co-invest and do a project that, invest more in these same acres than either one of us could do alone. So I think it's finding and that's an American example, but I think that you can find, if someone mentioned tropical spices, like I think there are a lot of these companies that are interested in really telling a good story about how they're doing good in the world and working with smallholder farmers. And I think if you bring them together, they are willing to think about, okay, yeah, how can we have a collective action, project that we can really showcase and take beautiful photos of the farmer. Like the brands want to do that, and they have a business need to invest in these acres and be able to like report against their scope 3 emissions. So there is a business case for that. And then I also, that the example I just gave, there was like a formal co-investment contract between these two large companies, but we've also seen more kind of natural co-investment opportunities when there are two entities interested in different types of claims. So some companies are really interested in offsetting their emissions. They're like, that's what we want. We want the carbon impacts. Tell me about the GHG numbers. And then there are other companies that are really eager to replenish water in a particular area where they're operating. So we have found companies that want to co-invest on the same acres and want to claim different things from those acres, and they can do so really efficiently by coming together. And you can actually kind of get more money coming in to farmers because one is claiming, a water benefit that they're funding, and the other one is claiming a GHG benefit. And I'm not a carbon accounting person, so I'm sure that they could tell you why that's legal and all that stuff, but I can tell you that it is possible, and it's a great way to bring together people to finance those kinds of projects.
Okay, thanks. All right, let me start with questions online. So Sloan, first two are here for you. One is, what is your new ERP system? I think you mentioned that briefly. And then the second one is, DT Global is facing an obstacle in not having access to the right mechanisms to receive funds from US government agencies to support current administration activities. I think it's something you mentioned. Could you provide a little bit more detail about what exactly you mean by that?
Well, the first one's easy. We're saying goodbye to Delta at Cost Point, and we're moving to it's called BST. It's going to be our global ERP system, much more straightforward, and I think much more easier to use. So that's all happening later this year. But for the first time ever, we'll have everyone globally on one ERP. We've always protected Delta at Cost Point like it was something couldn't get rid of in the US. And I think that was probably short-sighted. So anyway, we won't go on there, but we're moving to it's called BST. So on the mechanisms, so what we're seeing, at least at a state, is they don't have this procurement staff, right, to do procurements. So if they're looking to fund an idea, they are searching around for a mechanism to use to put the money on. Now, we've seen in some cases, USAID canceled projects have been turned back on, some cases, but in other cases, they're looking to do whatever they can to find a mechanism to use. And so, of course, Oasis is there, but that takes, I don't know, 4 months or something to do, maybe 6 months to do a procurement there. So when they want to move quickly, they need a mechanism. Now it has been some source sourcing we've seen, but that's really not. And so what we've learned, because I'm in this professional network with a lot of other sort of folks in the HHS and DOW and DI, intel communities. There's all these obscure contracts, mechanisms. The Navy with DOD or DOW that I never heard of, and I've this network of folks saying, "Oh, it's ANC, Alaskan Native. We could put it on here, and you could be a sub." This happens a lot in the Department DOD sphere and other Homeland Security and other agencies, and so we don't have any of those. we were USAID, we have Oasis, and that's about it. And so that's really not an option. We're not on Global Cap, which is a large IDIQ state will be using, and they've released one task order in the last few months, which is great to see. Certainly, we could be a sub, but it's challenging when if there's an administration priority, they want to do it, and they're not interested in waiting for, as we've seen, long procurement periods. They want to put it on a mechanism. So I don't know if that answered the question there, but that's what we're seeing.
Okay, thanks. And next question here is for Cristobal from Jeff. So he's asking if a firm or an organization with limited resources were to be interested in working with the IDB or the government in the way that AV has, if you had to choose between building a stronger relationship with the bank or building a stronger relationship with the host government, which of those would you try to prioritize?
It's definitely the host government. It's from our experience in multilateral, they gave the framework of what needs to be done, put the compliance in place, but the day-to-day is with the government, and you need to build that relationship, and you need to understand the priorities and understand the pain points, so you can really offer something of value.
Great, thanks. Okay, there's still more online, but I want to give a chance to anybody here in the room. Just raise your hands. Don't be shy. You don't speak, I'll have to go back to the computer. Come on, you all came down here for something.
Hi,
You want to introduce yourself?
sure. I'm Lindsay Coleman. I'm with Chorus International. I have a question for Joan. I'm curious if you guys are using biochar at all and how you're integrating that and using that with carbon credits.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Just did you guys hear that online? You hear the question? Okay, how to use biochar? Go ahead.
Cool, yeah. So biochar comes up a lot in like the international development kind of world because for anyone that doesn't know, and I'm not an expert on biochar, but you use like waste from certain supply chains. You can use cocoa pods, for example, and you use a process called pyrolysis. You stick it in a machine, it kind of burns the cocoa pods up or whatever. You can use, I think, other types of husks and other agricultural waste, and And then you create this amazing soil amendment that you can sell. And that has been super popular in international development projects, although it requires a lot of capital expenditure to get this kind of pyrolysis machine or whatever it's called. Indigo works in soil carbon credits, which are different from biochar credits. And I've learned all this in the last 6 months, it's like drinking from a fire hose. So there are these different kinds of ways you can get carbon credit and sequester carbon. So that's a different way. Another way that's popular in international development is agroforestry. That's something I've seen where you have a farmer and they're planting some trees, and trees are like a very popular way to create a carbon credit because you can really, it's so literal, like the carbon is in the tree, it's growing from the ground, and trees like don't move. They're there. They're usually going to stay there. Whereas in soil carbon, we have to worry about reversal. So what happens when a farmer stops farming in that way? And we have to have like a buffer pool of carbon credits to account for that. So there's all these different ways that you can create a carbon credit. We're not working in biochar, but I find it all very interesting. And I think I think that I was on it. Let me start again. I was on a webinar earlier this week with someone in charge of Amazon's carbon removal strategy, like the company, not the Amazon. And they were saying, we've seen historically that project developers, carbon credit project developers, were historically pretty vertically integrated. And I think that's also true for Indigo. They started looking into creating carbon credits around 2018, and we first issued them in 2022. It takes a lot of investment to get everything verified, set up a project, get arrangements with a registry who's going to issue the credits as a third party. And I think Indigo had a lot of venture capital investment to make that happen. This guy from Amazon said, Jamie Mulligan, he's great, you can look him up. He said, I think this space is going to become less vertically integrated, and I think that will, more organizations operating in the international development space could link in better to be like, hey, we are experts at working with smallholder farmers, so we can help you reach the farmers in that last mile process if you help get organizing everything on the legal side. So that's a very long-winded answer, but we don't do biochar is the answer.
But if I could just add, there's huge potential there because the carbon markets that have been around for a while, historically, almost all the projects have in the nature and green space have been in forest conservation or reforestation or agroforestry. And only recently it's entered into the ag sphere of soil carbon and biochar. But the potential there is massive. It's much bigger potential than what's in forest conservation because you have all the ag sector, all the ag land of the world, and with just a few small changes in practices, you can enhance the carbon in that soil by massive amounts.
I actually wanted to talk about biochar because my name is Eric Trachtenberg. I'm with the International Cotton Advisory Committee. Basically, we're the United Nations of Cotton and Textiles. And just by way of background, some of you have known me. Before I was with Millennium Challenge Corporation, I was a USD agriculture attaché for 16 years. So ICAC is very focused on biochar. And basically our chief scientist has developed a way which we could go into biochar with virtually no capital expense. It is ideally suited for small farmers. He has an open cone pit method. And we're now in the process of deploying it on 55,000 hectares in Uzbekistan. We have a GIZ project in Cameroon. And the idea is to mix biochar with bokashi, which is a kind of very rapid composting, and microorganisms, which they call in Hindi jivamrit. You put those together and you have very substantial increases in yield. This approach in Zambia basically led to a doubling of yields on cotton in that project. Yields are only up 30–40% in Cameroon, which was already high yielding. And so the model is, number one, to use the regenerative agriculture techniques to dramatically increase yields. but also use biochar as a way of setting the stage for carbon payments to farmers, which we are in the process of beginning to roll out. The Uzbeks are very far ahead on this process because their ag minister is a very well-renowned cotton researcher. And so in the year ahead, basically, we're looking to set up a system whereby the farmers get more money from cotton because their yields have gone up, but also to get substantial payments from biochar and carbon credits. So not only would you have massive increases in income, but you'd also have something even better. You'd have diversification. So that if cotton prices are bad, then they get extra money from carbon and those markets do not move in tandem. So there's a lot that we're doing and I'm happy to discuss it, but this is actually a key focus of the International Cotton Advisory Committee. So I'll just stop here, but happy to field any questions.
And I'll say that, we work with cotton farmers in the US, and there's a lot of things that are different about working with US farmers and Uzbek farmers, but actually
A few.
But actually, there's a lot of things that are the same. Like fundamentally, like the messaging that we're giving is like American farmers need diversification in their income streams. They need help, with farmer profitability, and this is going to help them. And
Well, our method that was developed was basically focused on smallholders, but we are now in the process of figuring out how to do it at scale. For example, if you look at carbon prices, I mean, you obviously know this in great detail, but the method that we have basically will yield about $100 a ton. So if you have a very hot furnace, which is capital intensive, you can go back to $160, $170. Of course, in the world of carbon credits, it's a little bit like the Wild West. Sometimes they can be low as $20 if you don't really trust the techniques by which they generate the credit, or if they're easily gained, there's always a risk premium, which results in the price discount. So it sounds like we have to have a further discussion.
Maybe a question for both of you that somebody just asked online is, we're talking about credits that in the case of Indigo are mostly from North America. And do we think there's impediments to expanding carbon credit creation and validation to Latin America, Africa that can be resolved in the near term, or are they more structural so that we wouldn't be seeing similar programs arising in lower middle income countries?
I mean, I think they're already arising. I mean, we have this joint venture in India, and it's called Grow Indigo. I'm not going to name the competing organizations, but there are competing organizations that are doing soil carbon as well in South Asia. So I think there's different. If my science team was here, they would say, listen, what Indigo is doing with biogeochemical modeling and using soil samples to help calibrate that model and understand what's happening. You can't take soil samples from a million smallholder farmers. It's much easier to work with one American farmer that owns 3,000 acres. So I would say, like, if Indigo said we want to start doing this in Mozambique, we would have to, actually there's a lot of large farmers in Mozambique too, but like we have a system that is well made in the US for large land holdings. And because of that, we can be pretty precise in our estimates, and that's why companies have really high confidence in us. I do think, and I'm not a scientist, but I think some of the companies that are operating in the same space, but in a smaller context, have to rely a lot more on like satellite to understand, like, are the farmers actually doing these practices and verifying that? So that being said, like, they're still selling carbon credits. So time will tell if the market has confidence in that soil carbon with smaller farmers, but it's already happening.
Great. I want to go back online to a question for you, Sloan. The question is how, from Willis from Creates International. The question is, how has the shifting funding landscape impacted how you integrate locally led interventions in your work? Perhaps other donors are looking at local input and localization and local led interventions differently than how USAID did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, when it comes to at least this administration and State Department, so let me back up. So we it's in our DNA, locally led development. We've published a best practice guide in our website. So we don't know how to, we think if we don't have locally led development, you can't have impactful development. So, so we're regardless of what the donor's asking, this is how we operate. I will say we're developing a concept for early recovery in the Middle East, in the country, and for early recovery. And we developed a concept paper, submitted to the embassy. They're not asking our locally led development plans. I mean, obviously we're going to be doing it because it's who we are and what we do, but it's just not something that they're bringing up or talking about. But at the same time, maybe it's another discussion, maybe it's another conference, Matt, like what this administration is trying to do with MOUs to billions of dollars in the health sector, direct funding, reminds me of USAID Forward years and years ago, right? I mean, everyone always backed away from it, as I understand it, because of the potential for fraud, waste, and abuse. And a lot of these developing countries weren't ready to do the direct implementation. And I think at least the administration is saying they're going for it. And so in some ways, that's a different form of locally led development. If the money goes directly to ministries, regardless of how it's used, it's going to go to local groups. So that's a really interesting development. I think, or even for SID, we should have a discussion on how, what does it mean for the community and what are the safeguards that really should be there and how can it be done well to have impact? But sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but yeah, that was a great question.
Okay, thanks. Other questions from the room?
Thank you. I'm Paula Feeney. The subject matter today is agriculture, or at least that's what we all came out to hear about. And I find it interesting that so far, other than our colleague here who mentioned he put 16 years or whatever with USDA, we haven't heard much from many of our speakers, or maybe from other people here in the room or not in the room, on what is USDA doing that might be of interest, for these organizations that we represent or that are represented here, individuals might be able to be engaging. I know, for example, that Michelle Becker, who used to be at AID as an assistant administrator, and then when the Biden administration came in, she went over to the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And then when Trump came back, she's over as a deputy undersecretary and doing a lot of outreach nationally with interested groups in agriculture. And are any of us thinking and working and talking and engaging with the USDA because they have agriculture in their title? I see a number of heads shaking here today, which is really exciting, but I'd love to hear what voices we can bring to the table. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, definitely USDA used to be our second major donor before the whole crisis, and it's still been a relevant donor for us. And we are keeping track of the different opportunities that they are offering. We are looking forward to see how the progress a bit come this year. So we are tracking that down. In theory, in the next 4 weeks, we will hear probably the list of countries and then the solicitation. So that's something that I think everyone in the community is looking forward to see how that's going to look like. Last year was a bit different from what they used to be. So something that we're keeping track on, and also trying to see if there is anything local for the United States as well. Because I mean, as we were discussing, something that we have learned or that we have realized now that there is an important market in the United States that could make good use of some of the methodologies and technologies and innovation that we have been using in other countries to work together with farmers. So we are quite open to explore different things also here in the United States. So far we haven't been successful, but yeah, we're keeping an eye also on that, and definitely USDA is a major funding, and also the states, the different states. We're also keeping an eye on those potential opportunities.
I can chime in. I'm Gina Perry. I work for the WISH program. We're a program of the American Soybean Association. So I work directly on behalf of all the soybean farmers in the US. And so WISH, World Initiative for Soy and Human Health, we are a combination of trade and development. So we've utilized food assistance programs within USDA, but also market development funds, so MAP and FMD. mostly with this trade focus with the administration. And I will say from a cooperator standpoint, so the ag commodity groups, we're having this conversation as well. As the landscape is shifting, and we see that there's a lot of knowledge in the development space. As a cooperator group, how do we start engaging more with all of you? So WISH and a couple of the ag commodity groups have been doing this for years, but there's a lot of other commodities that don't know how to engage. And so there's a knowledge gap, I think, going both ways of you don't know what the ag groups are doing and what funding sources we have access to. And then the other ag groups don't know what all of you are doing and the expertise that you have. And so we had a working group session in July at our ag cooperators meeting talking about this. It was just the ag groups, but I think the idea is to start bringing more of you into this conversation as partnerships are shifting. And how do we, continue to work together in a way that hasn't really been done before? And I think this America First approach is going to be extremely, it already is prominent, but it's being more prominent not only on the commodity side, but also within USDA and their food assistance programs. And I think there's some groups that are struggling with that. We've always had America First kind of focused just by the nature of working on behalf of soybean farmers, but working in developing emerging markets it's a little bit trickier trying to look long term and America First connection than these immediate trade wins that USDA wants. So I'm always happy to connect and have conversations. I know we've talked to many of the groups in here over the years, but just from an ag cooperator group, that's kind of where we are in making those connections moving forward.
And I have a few thoughts too, because I speak a lot with people at USDA. It's one of the few areas where there's actually more money than there used to be. So USDA has got a big increase. And I think the key is that, and also one thing you see across the US government, the power of DOGE is in decline because there are groups of officials now, even political appointees, who have real regrets about having cut too much, withdrawn too much, pulled out too much. So there is a reconsideration going on. And so, for instance, you saw what happened at the State Department's Office of Global Food Security. It was wiped out and it's been rehired. CIMMYT got zeroed out from 150 and now it's been restored to 40. So you see lots of this backtracking going on. It won't be at the levels it was before. So I think the key, and putting on the cooperator approach, is if you can link what you're doing to a US export goal, then that opens the door to the cooperators. And like ASA has always been really good about thinking big picture, some others too, but ASA is always traditionally one of the better ones. So if you can link what you're doing on development to promoting US export interests, you might actually be able to tap into USDA money.
Yeah.
But that association does have to be clear though.
And I will say, just to add on real quick about that, is you have cooperators that with another USDA market development set of funding, the RAP program, they had dollars earmarked for Africa that they have to spend on Africa programming. Many of those cooperator groups have never worked on the continent. And so it's a very new type of market for them. And so they don't have the community, they don't have the contacts. So if you can come in and say, oh, we've been working in X market for this many years, and we have this network, how can we help you ease into that market? I think they're really gonna appreciate that.
And these cooperators have an organization here in Washington, DC. They have representatives who can kind of facilitate things, but America First, and Eric's right, but you've got staff who are trying to implement, or a reduced staff trying to implement, and the Food for Peace program is now at USDA. Now they're gonna have to see if Congress keeps it there, but State Department kept the Feed the Future labs, which that announcement has come out.
And they came back, they were killed, one was spared, the rest were killed.
Kansas was the only one that got to keep.
Yeah, that, I thought others are coming back.
Well, they put the notice out, so
Yeah.
they're rebidding it basically for everybody.
But a lot of the people working at those labs have already moved on, so.
Yeah, there's a permanent loss of human capital because people have exited development or they've gone to the private sector, out of development space.
So Food for Peace staff who are now not at USDA to help with that program.
Oh, So yeah, there's been a huge exodus of talent from space, and even if they restore all the money, some people said, I'm not going to give the government a chance again. They don't want to deal with it. For some people, a lot of people I know just retired.
And to further make it complicated, they've announced they're going to sell the South Building, which is where the Foreign Agriculture Service staff are all housed. So people are like, where will we all go? There's a history at USDA of like the Economic Research Service during Trump 1. They got moved to Kansas City. So people are looking at, does this is what I want to do with my family?
2/3 of the staff quit. Right. So, I mean, and then ERS, even though Biden moved it back, the loss in human capital was permanent. ERS has never been the same ever since. Damage was, nothing's truly permanent, but like say it's long-term damage.
So any last questions for our panelists? We'll have plenty of more time kind of here in the room.
I have a question for Joan about the private voluntary sector, because, sorry, I'm Alex from ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. And that kind of thing, like the carbon credit, sounds like a dream for like the kind of work we do, right? Which is all over the world. And there's so many ideas coming from all different like contexts and regions. And so the idea of like, oh, we're gonna connect businesses, right, who will voluntarily pay to meet their needs and meet community needs is like, that's the dream. But I can see like a world where like, oh, carbon credits didn't happen because it's a little indirect, you know, and complicated, and there wasn't traction, there wasn't certain backing and kind of institutional buy-in. This may be too broad of a question, but like, are there certain things you see in that space, the private voluntary, you know, sector you're talking about, that lead to, you know, the businesses, the mechanisms that last? Does that question make sense? Like
what are the forces that are?
What does it take to make them succeed? I know that's like a big question.
Yeah, so I think maybe I even misspoke earlier saying, you know, legislation does have a big force in that. When I say like scope 3 emissions, like where does scope 3 come from? Like someone wants companies to reporting their scope 3 emissions. And that's what allows us to have these cool programs where we're working with farmers to assess what's going on the field level. If those farmers are in the supply shed of one of these corporations or fashion companies even. I do think uniquely, you know, we're lucky to have a guest from Pepsi-Co today. Pepsi-Co is the largest, I believe, procurer of potatoes, like I think in the world. Like they are thinking about making potato chips for the next century. So they actually care about resilience of farmers. So it's like, do we need the regulatory system to push for certain things? Companies that are sourcing ag commodities, I think they have a vision. They have a CEO who's not, you know, changing over every couple of years. The CEO is going to be there for a while. And so I really do see this difference with food and ag and fashion companies wanting to do like genuinely build resilience in their supply chain. And that doesn't even have to come from like a good place in their hearts. It can come from, you know, risk management. And I think on the tech side, it's so interesting. Like these big tech companies have these whole teams of people who are in charge of managing their portfolio of carbon projects and water projects, separate water teams and carbon teams. And I do find that amazing. And I think they're also thinking long-term. One of the spaces I find most exciting now is with data center companies, and not just the big tech ones, like the smaller co-location providers, or even other companies that are you know, providing some aspect of the infrastructure of the physical centers. I think, you know, this is a huge space that's growing and growing and growing, and a lot of them are growing so fast and investing so much money, and they're not really thinking about sustainability yet. And I get to come in and talk to them and be like, hey, have you thought about the rural communities that are in the areas where you're operating? Because they're, you know, making the news talking about how you're ruining their community. So, we can partner to like kind of pay them. Do you want to pay them via an Indigo program with farmers? So ultimately, what am I saying? I'm saying long-term risk is something that companies really do consider. And the carbon projects can help manage long-term soil health.
Thanks. And
yeah,
last question.
Sorry, my name's Ben. I'm also from ADRA International. So this question is specifically to Cristobal, but I'm interested in hearing what Sloan and Joan have to say also, and it's specifically to you because you mentioned it. So thinking about as ACDI VOCA changes the way that you approach things, the way you're designed, and thinking about diversification of funding. You mentioned more closely aligning with your private funding and impact investment. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about that experience of, especially around impact investment, your experience with that, and maybe what it looks like as that becomes more closely aligned with some of the other programs you're doing, whether you found it's working as a way to leverage and get into new opportunities, or if this is just kind of a flattening of the way that you do things. But I'm curious to hear about impact investment.
No, definitely the fact that our impact investment activities are quite healthy. It's something that we are leveraging and seeing how we can use that tool to attract new donors. And one of the ideas that we are still exploring, we approach this private company that have they are really looking into sourcing with responsibility for the long run. And we want to basically, the idea that we have already a concept now for that, is that basically that we are willing to put our own money into investing into this program if we get the technical assistance that mitigate the risk of that investment. That we can make that, put our own money, basically invest together with the private sector and bring a donor that could also subsidize the technical assistance. This is the most expensive part of this arrangement. We have good potential, at least 3 donors are interested on exploring that possibility. And I think that has been an approach that we believe could really bring some novelty to what we are doing. I think if there is something that we have learned through the different years of operating in different countries, is that we know who is who in the different value chain. And that has a value in terms of the market, in terms of understanding what are the actors that are bankable, that we know, and that we can invest because after working with them for years, there is no different due diligence than that, isn't it? So that's something that we're trying to find out different ways to put a value in that, and doing investment together, and just basically bringing another donor that could also facilitate the technical assistance, which as usual is the most expensive part of all that.
Joan or Sloan, anything to add about that question?
I mean, just from our side, I would say diversification really for us, I just want to focus on the private sector. I mean, on the public sector donors, we're seeing, whether it's FCDO or SDC or others, a lot of competition, a lot lower margins. It's just a lot of competition right now. I mean, everyone's sort of looking for, so we've been really intentionally investing more in the private sector. But again, this business line, Stephen leads it. We've been at it for 3 years. So it's not just a last minute thing. It takes time to build relationships and to build your reputation, your expertise in the market. And so, I mean, I think we really believe there's a there, and a lot of our skills do translate. And so Stephen can answer better than I can. It's been quite a journey to get to where we are, but been really exciting. And just a very, very different business model than our public sector work.
Great. Okay, I think we should wrap up there. It's just about 5 o'clock. Let me thank again Sloan online, Cristobal, Joan here in person. Just to recap a little bit about the event, I think we're seeing that the new development landscape for agriculture, as with other topics, is challenging, but people are doing it, and they're finding exciting and creative ways to find new strategies, find new things to do, find new partners, and implement positive solutions. So I encourage everybody to look in more about the work that these organizations are doing: Indigo Ag, ACDI VOCA, DT Global, Also, the people that we heard from here, ADRA, cotton, soy, lots of really interesting, fascinating things. If I can finish then with a few more plugs for the SID. There are many events coming up in the next few weeks. There is a Young Professionals Happy Hour next week on the 18th. There is an event about development finance, the shifting landscape of development finance, that's on March 19th, and that is in person. And then there is the Future of Development Forum. This is the unconference conference that is on March 26th. So please check out the SID website and sign up for these events. And we hope to see you all again soon. Final
Great.
words?
Thank you all for coming and for such an engaging discussion. Thanks to everybody online and and
Great.
thank you, Matt,
Thank you, Matt.
our fearless co-chair.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Matt.
Are you selling?